Go to the Watchtower. The town had flags and a grocery and a diner, but the road into it bore a different message. A splintered board nailed to a post, letters worn until they were a pale warning: don't go to the Watchtower. People said it like a superstition, a caution tossed from generation to generation. Mara read it first as a joke, and then as an instruction she was meant to break. She had driven until the sky went thin, and the sea sounded like a distant radio, because the last thing her brother left her was a recorder with one file labeled simply Watchtower. Mara's car smelled of rain and coffee. Inside sat a tiny red LED that blinked in the dark. Liam's recorder. He had been restless in voice messages, chasing coastal echoes, cataloging storms and the hum of tides. When he stopped answering, the town kept his kettle warm and his chair empty like a ritual. Mara wasn't here for nostalgia. She cataloged sound for a living. Her job was to separate meaning from noise, to find what a recording meant when it stopped being a thing and started being an accusation. The file called Watchtower was shorter than she expected. The tower was older than memory, built to keep lanterns high against fog that swallowed fishermen whole. It rose like a spine from the marsh, iron ribs, and a narrow staircase that wound up into a glass room. Its paint had long given up, barnacles decorated its base. Locals avoided its shadow as if it could stain. The sign's paint flaked still where fingers had traced the letters someone had added, and the screaming started in a cramped hand beneath the main sentence. That extra line trembled between warning and comment, and Mara felt the ground tilt beneath the ordinary world. She visited the library because history prefers ink to rumor. An archivist slid a slim folder across the desk. Lighthouse logs, storm reports, and a brittle journal with margins burnt, as if a candle had coughed while someone wrote. The handwriting was cramped, the entries drifted between weather and something else, notes about listening, about how the glass room could carry back what you believed it would. Someone had written in a different hand between the lines, neat and urgent. Do not feed it your voice. Mara laughed in a way that was not funny. Back at her rented cottage, she plugged the recorder in and listened. Static unfurled like a coastline, then a single breath, then a distant knock, as if someone had tapped the recorder's case. The file contained names whispered into wind and a tone that seemed cut from glass. At one point, the recording mirrored a sentence Mara had muttered alone at night years ago, a private phrase about a lost dog that had never left her mouth outside the house. The hair at the base of her neck rose. The recorder had collected things it had no right to know. The townspeople answered questions with smiles that were too practiced. The grocer said he didn't like to speak of the tower. The old woman on the porch changed the subject, and the mayor asked Mara to be careful without saying why. When she mentioned Liam, faces tightened like curtains closing. At dusk, she walked back toward the dunes where the tower watched. The sea made its ordinary noises, white teeth at the shore, and still the air tasted of something like listening, as if sound itself had weight here. She felt watched, not by eyes, but by attention. The stairwell smelled of salt and oil, and the hollow ache of metal. each step side. Small names were carved into treads and rails, dates layered upon dates, centuries of visitors leaving marks that looked like warnings when read in a hurry. A rope with a handset hung in the mid-landing, as if someone had left a conversation mid-sentence. Upward, the glass lantern room waited like an eye with a tired iris. The wind found the gaps and made a rhythm, and Mara realized she could follow that rhythm like a thread if she needed to unravel what had been braided there. Inside the lantern room, a brass microphone sat on a stand, catalogued by dust and tilt. The floor was a mosaic of dried salt and footprints. Someone had thrown a blanket over the lamp, and a stillness like a held breath hung there. Mara wiped the microphone's dish with a sleeve and found her palm printed in the tarnish. It should have been an expected relic, but when she blew across the microphone like a key, the sound didn't leave the room. It multiplied and folded into itself, returning as a dozen versions of the same exhale, each with an accent of memory. There were names carved into the microphone's stand as well, dates overlapping until chronology blurred. One fresh mark read Liam, as if whoever had written it expected a return. Mara found his small notebook wedged behind the base, pages filled with shorthand notes and sound maps. Between the lines, he had sketched circles like listening tests. Written in the margin of the last page, "It will remember what you believe. Speak carefully." The handwriting wavered, as though the writer had been interrupted mid-pen. Mara set the notebook on the stand and felt the buildup of something patient assembling itself. She clipped Liam's final file into the recorder and held the brass microphone to the speaker as if starting a conversation. The tower drank the sound and exhaled back a chorus, Liam's voice braided with others. Some she recognized, some no one could have known. Dreams, childhood taunts, a sailor's prayer, all layered so close her own breathing became a track. The room folded these fragments together with the ease of a seamstress. When a phrase that was hers returned mixed with Liam's, she could no longer tell which memory had belonged to whom. The screaming began not as a scream, but as a small, accurate replication of a child's cry from a summer she had forgotten. It multiplied into animal noises, and then into syllables that matched the cadence of the town bell. The tower layered them until they became a texture. Mara pressed her palms to her ears, but the sound didn't stop. It re-entered her through the recorder and into the brass microphone, where it rearranged into pleas. "Don't go up," said a voice she couldn't place. Then another. "Come closer." The tracks argued with one another like old acquaintances quarreling in the dark. She tried to leave, and the path did not obey. Marsh grass rearranged itself. The dune ridges shifted like pages in a book. Houses she had walked past earlier now opened onto unfamiliar alleys. The map in her mind unraveled. When she stopped to catch her breath, a neighbor's voice called from behind a hedge and turned into the recorded voice of her father, dead for years, saying a sentence he'd only ever said to her once: "Don't feed it your fear." Her certainty unraveled into a knowledge that sound here wasn't just playback. It was a claim. At the top, in the lantern room's hollow center, she found a glass bell displayed like a relic. Tucked beneath it was a single note, folded so carefully it could have been a trap. Don't go to the Watchtower. The handwriting matched the scrawl in the library. Something behind the glass hummed. Mara read the note out loud because the tower had taught her that words were answers. Her voice cracked, and the bell's hum turned into a chorus of missing voices. Liam's voice came, closer than the paper between her fingers. Mara, don't. The sound collapsed, and the air thickened as if swallowing syllables. She reached for the bell as the chorus collected itself into a single note that pulled at her like tide to moon. Fingers brushed glass, and the world rebalanced in a fraction of a second. The recorder clicked. The tower drew breath. And in that suspended heartbeat, Mara understood two possibilities at once: that the tower kept voices like birds in a cage, and that those voices would not let a new one pass unchanged. The last thing she remembered was not the scream, but the feeling of an answer arriving back into her throat like a returned letter. By dawn, the town looked ordinary again, as towns do after a long tide. The sign on the road remained, but had one more name scratched into its edge. The archivist later filed the recorder's contents under unresolved. People claimed to have heard nothing. Others avoided the dunes. Mara was seen walking the shore sometimes, a figure at the edge of sound, mouth moving as if in conversation. No one could say what she answered. The watchtower kept its light, patient and indifferent, and somewhere inside the brass and glass, voices continued to practice saying her name.